I needed to be there, see them come back to life, not just for them, but also for me. I needed to know that there was a future for those who served the country and were wounded, and that if it meant that they could come back, I could come back, all of us could come back.
The first female chaplain to see combat in American military history finds herself challenged, yet sustained by her work with the heroes of wounded warriors.
Women have it rough because, they say we can have it all, but you can't do everything the best. That line in there, I'm a best giver. And so for me, anyway, there had to be hard decisions that I had to make.
Another woman, among the first to graduate from West Point, discusses her desire and the pressures to be all she can be, not only as a soldier and an officer, but a wife and mother. Hello and welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families, in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation in Richmond, Virginia. In this podcast, we'll hear two very different stories, both from women warriors, yet still very similar, as they describe their drive to serve and excel, what broke their hearts, and what mended them. The author of our first story, What I Learned in Wounded Warriors, is Laura Bender, former Navy and Marine chaplain. Laura speaks to us from her farm in Michigan with her parakeets chirping behind her. After Laura, we'll hear Swing Low, written by Laurel McHargue, who served a dozen years as an officer in the U.S. Army. Then I'll sit and chat with Laurel from her home in Colorado. Let's first listen to What I Learned in Wounded Warriors, movingly read by Caitlin Nolan.
For 3 years, I served as the senior chaplain to the Wounded Warrior Regiment at Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia. My team and I provided pastoral care to wounded, ill, and injured Marines, their family members, and the military and civilian staff who advocated and cared for them. This was our sacred privilege. Although we were there to give support to these Marines, I cannot overstate the valuable lessons I learned from them, which remain with me still. Injury and illness may replace restrictions on a person's activities, but do not define them. When Marines arrive at the hospital, they initially see themselves as patients. At the point they remember they are still Marines, healing increases its pace. The reminder is usually from a gunnery sergeant who asks the family members to go downstairs for coffee, then counsels the Marine on his unsatisfactory haircut and lack of visits to the gym. When the Marine points out his medical issues, which are often grave, the gunny reminds him, as only gunnies can do, that he is still a United States Marine who earned that title, and his responsibility is to adhere to the standards of the Corps. Within days, the patient is again referring to himself as Lance Corporal something, has a fresh, high, and tight haircut, and is asking how soon he can join the seated volleyball team. Self-definition matters. The first time I met a quadruple amputee, making his way through the corridor with prosthetics, he held the door open for me. An improvised explosive device had removed his limbs, but had no effect on his desire to be a gentleman. One of the best ways to decrease difficulties is to increase joy. One way is through athletic activities. The thrill of competition, pushing beyond perceived limits, cheering for your team, is healing. At regimental events, we knew we had succeeded when a Marine referred to themselves as a swimmer or a basketball player, and not in relation to their injuries. A key component to increasing joy is to maintain a healthy sense of humor. Case in point, one of the favorite t-shirts for combat-injured Marines at Walter Reed states, Wounded Warrior, some assembly required. And on the back, it says, I had a blast in Afghanistan. Healthy connections are essential. Those who fare the best, whether Marines or staff members, are those who make the best connections. I do not mean the most friends, but those who remain connected to what matters most, the values that define them, the people who love them, the hope for the future that awaits, and the vision of their best selves. As a person of faith, I would also add those who feel connected to the God who never lets them go. The call of God upon a person's life is not voided by illness or injury. It may be redefined and redirected, but it remains. When Marines can discern and answer that call, becoming agents of care for others instead of just recipients, everyone benefits, especially them. These lessons about self-definition, joy, connection, and calling are among many I will carry with me for the rest of my life. May God continue to strengthen and bless all those whose service to country has wounded them in body, mind, or spirit, and those who care for them.
I'm joined by former Naval Chaplain Laura Bender. Laura, listening to that story now with you, so much jumped out at me, but one line in particular, when the gunny sergeant says to these young men and women who, as you say, can so often be gravely injured, reminds them, you are still a Marine and you will live up to the standards of the Marine Corps. And they grow from that moment, the whole piece, they grow from that moment to where they can open the door for others and not just be recipients of care, but care for themselves. And you have been there for that whole metamorphosis from when they are wounded in the battlefield, you've been in combat, to where you see them playing wheelchair basketball. Mm-hmm. You've seen so much in your career, Laura, but this in particular, watching the wounded come back to wholeness, what must that mean to you?
I needed to see that. I needed to be their chaplain. After witnessing the wounds they received and the fear for the future that they had, I needed to be there, see them come back to life, not just for them, but also for me. I needed to know that there was a future for those who served the country and were wounded, and that if it meant that they could come back, I could come back, all of us could come back.
I'd like to note for our listeners that squeaking in the background is Laura's parakeets.
Yes, it's Grayson and Freckles. They love Zoom.
Yeah. You've written a great deal about the military, and every once in a while, you sneak God in there. Because I've been reading your work for years now, and it's always so powerful from the human side, the tragedies of war and the wastes of war and the costs of war. And in this piece, you did the same thing. You wrote about the courage of these young people coming back, as I said, to wholeness. But then one of the things you learned is that the relationship with God is not put on pause because you've been wounded. And I've always loved that about your work, that you don't proselytize. You treat your faith like the leg of a chair. It's one of the many things that holds you up.
Mm-hmm.
So for me now, of all the things that you learned in Wounded Warriors, address this relationship with God that you must question first. You must question how can these things happen? And then rising out of that question, how things happen to these young people, these tragedies, rising out of that, you see God at work healing them as well, yeah?
I see that God is always in the process of bringing life out of death. And if human beings choose to go to war, if human beings choose to be ugly to one another, if humans decide to be harmful in any way, that's our choice. But God tries to find some way to redeem that, some way to bring people back to life and to use, even some of the harm that's been done to them to grow their faith, grow them in maturity and the ability to relate to one another. God's always bringing life out of death.
And he seems to work best through people like you who, the time I've known you, you've always put us first, us people first. You never lead with God. He's always up your sleeve. And it was the same way in this story. You didn't preach. You just said, God's a pillar. He's there for me. He's there for them. What's that old saying? You might not believe in God, but he believes in you.
Mm-hmm.
So, chap, you were specific in this beautiful story that gunnery sergeants, Marine gunnies, make the best motivators for these.
Oh, they do.
Tell me why.
Because they have a standard and they expect everyone to be held to the same standard. And, sometimes we forget who we are, and we need somebody who can tell us who we are until we can remember for ourselves. And gunnery sergeants have a very forceful way of making people stand up and become who they're supposed to be, even if they doubt it. The gunnery sergeant doesn't doubt it. And there's something very powerful in dealing with someone who sees you more than you see you, because that's how you can become who they see.
Now, we have respect for all the branches of service, of course. And I know that you have served with and among all the branches of service. Tell me, Laura, what's a Marine?
A Marine is a person who has high ideals and will do everything they can to live up to them. I love the Marine Corps. They hold people to becoming their best selves. And if we could just keep from having wars and, killing people, I would recommend everybody try to become a Marine. But they are special. They really are.
Great segue, because it gives me the chance to say, and so are you. Now, our second story, Swing Low, performed by Melissa Price. Then I'll speak with author Laurel McHargue.
Gently pushing the swing, I say, wee, in a smiling voice, and Nicholas giggles. He's the sweetest, most adorable 1-year-old on the planet. I've recently given up my Army career for him. Timing of the 1992 military drawdown helps with my decision. I tell myself, and anyone who might ask, the choice was easy. Sacrifice a job or my child? I couldn't give my best to both. I'm a best giver. My humble brag. Stand up, hook up, shuffle to the door. I volunteer to call cadence for an airborne school run at Fort Benning, Georgia. One of few women in 44th Company, 4th Student Battalion in August of '81, I have more to prove than my male classmates. Have to hide my disgust at some of the cadence's napalm sticks to kids, because sensitivity isn't an asset. Do more than my fair share of flutter kicks in the sawdust pits for supposed infractions. It's not fair, but fairness isn't what I expect. After 3 intense weeks of gnats in my nose and blisters in unusual places, I earn my wings and the pride that comes with them. The swing set sits outside our tiny West Point apartment. The day smells of autumn, crisp and clean and maple leafy. My husband, Mike, runs cadets ragged as an instructor at West Point's Department of Physical Education. and I play house. Most days since hanging up my captain's bars in June have been great. But there goes one of my 1983 classmates, and an uncomfortable yearning squeezes my chest. She looks fit and fantastic in her uniform as she strides past the apartment. I look at my sneakers and jeans and think, I should be doing something, accomplishing something important. Ma'am, no more, stop. Groans from soldiers in my truck platoon at Fort Hood, Texas delight me during morning PT in 1984. I introduce them to aerobics with my boombox and upbeat mixtapes Mike makes for me. They try, but can't keep up with my flash dance exercises and so many flutter kicks. I hear about my PT sessions from soldiers in other platoons. They're jealous. Their LT just makes them run. My soldiers have something to complain about. Their crazy LT, and they love it. I recognize the boast in their suffering. I push, and Nicholas giggles. I convince myself it's great to have clothing options, to be able to dress however I please, to wear longer hair and dangly earrings, to slouch when I feel like it, to snuggle with my son while watching cartoons after my morning coffee, to nestle him in his stroller for a casual jog, to take my time. You want to take control? The battalion commander's Huey pilot tours me over a West Texas desert while the brass harumphs in hours-long planning sessions below. Yes, please. Of course I want to take control. Can't say no, can't show fear, though it grips my guts. He trusts me. After a brief instruction, he releases the stick, and I'm flying. I'm flying. I'm grinning like a fool, but I don't care. I'm flying. We have to return to base, and I grudgingly allow him to take over. Before we land, he wants to see if I can hover the UH-1. He shows me the tilt gauge and tells me to watch the horizon. You don't want to overcorrect. Relaxed hands, don't clench. Ready? I nod. My hands aren't clenched, but there are other places. Glancing between the gauge and the horizon, I hold the Huey steady above the ground. Sweat tickles my back and drenches my pits. Adrenaline exhilarates every fiber of my being. You're a natural! Let's get lunch! He lands the craft, and I convince myself I can walk away from it on my spaghetti legs. My classmate looks so good in her uniform. That jealousy in my chest disappoints me. I envy the respect she commands because I know how it feels. It feels good. From what I've experienced, people neither respect nor admire moms. Housewives. The German police officer doesn't care that I'm married. He is too. For 6 weeks during Reforger, I stress over my platoon of heavy equipment transporter drivers on the Autobahn, and he shows up frequently. He wants me. Can't have me, even after bringing me flowers in the hospital, where I spend one night in a warm bed with antibiotics for pneumonia. Despite my cropped hair and oh-so-flattering fatigues, he makes me feel beautiful. I know the deal, though. I'm an officer. I'm in charge, not him. Go home to your wife. People judge. I wanted to have it all. Career, family, health, happiness, respect. And I tried to keep all the balls in the air, all the peas on my plate, all the work-life balance ingredients fresh. But after a year of having and doing it all, being a full-time Army officer and other time mommy, wife, chef, maid, bill payer, butcher and baker and candlestick maker, it crushed me. Nefarious operatives upriver from our encampment during Operation Team Spirit 89 breach a dam. I return from a command meeting to find my soldiers sloshing in rising water, loading deuce-and-a-half trucks with everything they can carry. Porta potties float away. Soon we're all up to our crotches in river water, diesel fuel, piss, and worse. And it's pouring. The scene could be used in a disaster movie, except everyone's laughing. Captain McHargue, catch! A soggy something lands in my arms, and I toss it into the cargo bed. I love my soldiers. Yesterday, when I called to question a charge on a medical bill, the lady asked, "Is your husband available?" Said she couldn't discuss the charge with a dependent. A dependent. No longer a captain with my own military ID, I'm treated like a child, like I have no right to make decisions on important things like bills and insurance. The memory of the call makes my heart race again. I might have slammed down the receiver when the lady refused to listen to reason. She didn't care that I was a West Point graduate, that I'd jumped out of airplanes, that I'd recently commanded a company of 130 soldiers, that I'd earned my master's degree, and. I was a dependent, no longer in charge, insignificant. A nurse removes life support. I hold my soldier in my lap as she holds her dying child. I rock with her as she rocks the beautiful bandaged-headed 2-year-old and listen as she hums softly until her tears win. I pray she won't feel my trembling beneath her quaking body. Be strong, I tell myself. Be the company commander, the rock she needs right now. I'll fall apart later. "Oh, you don't work? How lovely that must be." The dismissal, the words sting. Nicholas's sweet voice breaks my funk. "Up, Mommy." He's done with sitting on the swing alone. I shake my face back into a smile and lift him into a hug before sitting with him on my lap. With my arms hooked around the chains, I hold him snug as a bug in a rug against my belly, and I pump my legs. We swing higher, and Nicholas laughs. At my change of command ceremony, my soldiers present me with our company guidon, framed beautifully with a plaque that reads, "Mother Trucker. For 19 months, 5 days, 4 hours, 8 minutes, and 5.7 seconds of outstanding leadership. Commander, 301st Trans Company, keep on truckin'." "Swing low, sweet chariot," I sing. Nicholas loves this song. I think about what he might enjoy for lunch. Chicken fingers and applesauce. It's a decision I'm qualified to make. "Come on, kiddo." We hop off the swing, and I take his tiny hand. Lunchtime and a story. He doesn't know it yet, but I have stories.
I'm joined by Laurel McHargue from Colorado, the author of Swing Low. Laurel, that story runs beautifully, two memories side by side. My first question for you is, do they do that in your head? Do those two lives, Laurel in uniform, doing flutter kicks, making your men suffer in PT, and Laurel, the doting good mother and spouse and head of household, I mean, do they run side by side in your head even today?
That's a great question. And I never really thought of that. But yes, I think the answer is yes. I don't think I could ever forget my military days, the 4 years at West Point, 9 years active duty, 3 years in the reserves. I'll never forget those because they're part of me. And yet most people don't know that that was a part of my life. Most people know me as a mother and a wife and an author now. But I still dream. I still have those dreams of being late for formation because I can't find my belt. I still wake up stressed with some of those things. I don't think that those memories will ever leave me. And yeah, and there are times when I'm just doing motherly things or wifely things or taking a walk when I say to myself, I can't back down. I can't be lazy. I have to do the best I can. I still have those desires to, for lack of a better term, be all that you can be, which used to be the Army motto before it went to Army of One, which don't get me started on that.
So question for you. I'm going to make this a coin toss, okay, which means it cannot land on the edge. It's heads or it's tails. You pick one or the other, okay? And I'll preface the question by saying I talk to a lot of veterans, a lot. I teach them, I work with them, and I know how they would answer this question. And I want to ask you, which are you? Are you, in your own head, are you the young woman who was a young mother in that story? Or are you, right now, or are you that young powerhouse veteran, or that young powerhouse, you went to West Point? I mean, that's formative, right? You're a ring banger.
Yeah.
And so if you have to pick one, heads or tails, are you the young civilian wife and mother, or are you Captain Laurel McHargue?
Yeah, I'm the officer. That's a hard question.
I know,
David.
but I'm going to tell you, everybody I ask would say the same thing.
Yeah, because, and maybe I was before I even went to West Point, because I wanted something different from what friends and family had done. I wanted more than the mother role. And I mean, Mike and I were married 7 years before we had children, before I convinced him that we needed to bring wonderful people into the world as well. So I loved my Army time, and I would have stayed into retirement if I hadn't also had that craving to be a mother. But, women have it rough because, they say we can have it all, but you can't do everything the best. And, that line in there, I'm a best giver. And so for me, anyway, there had to be hard decisions that I had to make.
Now, you said you wanted more, just said it, that you wanted more than, let's say, the normal choices. And
yes,
and for women, it's typical in our culture. You wanted more than the house and the home and spousehood.
Yeah.
Yet when you got the more, you came back and chose this. Walk me through that.
Well, so I was still active duty. I was at grad school when our first child was born, when Nicholas was born. And the plan was to go to West Point and teach in the Department of English. That's where the Army sent me. And I finished my degree a quarter early, got up to West Point, and they stuck us in a teeny little 2-bedroom apartment. So here I was with my husband, who was working in the Department of Physical Education, and I was assigned to the English department, and we had only one extra bedroom. And the plan was to get a nanny and for me to continue to work and stay in the Army. And we couldn't have a nanny with no extra bedroom. And so we petitioned the military to move down one floor where we could have a 3-bedroom apartment. And they denied the request. It was one of those really bizarre times where I didn't understand why they wouldn't do something to help a double West Point graduate military family with a child. And it was 1992. They were reducing the force then, and they were paying people to get out. So it was, I guess, a good time for me to really think about what I wanted to do. And looking at Nick and having to put him in daycare, and that he wasn't happy. I wasn't happy with the situation. And I just felt like there was too much on my rucksack was too heavy at the time. Mm-hmm. And it was either offload the career or offload a child. And I wanted that. I wanted everything. I wanted both. I really wanted both. And it was an easy decision when it came right down to it to say, all right, I'm not going to sacrifice my son. I'm not going to sacrifice my time with him.
What if you'd gotten the nanny? Would you have stayed in?
You know what? I probably would have. I love teaching. I loved being in uniform. I loved being in the Army. I loved all of that.
Yeah.
And so, that one little thing, that one support from my chain of command could have made a huge difference in my life. And yet, when I look at what my life has become and what I've been able to do, I ended up teaching in the public school system, which was fabulous. I ended up, having time to write my books, which has been fabulous. I had time to have another child. Yeah, I feel honestly like I've had the best of both worlds.
Talk to me about West Point. When you went to West Point, it was in the early days of women on that campus. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, that beautiful campus on the Hudson. When I graduated from high school, I went to Smith College, a private all-women's college in Massachusetts. And I was not pleased with myself, but I heard something about West Point and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. I felt like I wasn't being challenged. And my parents were always very encouraging to all us girls. They would say you could do and be anything you wanted to do and be. And, I just believed them without really having any idea of how much I could do or what I could be. And I started looking into West Point and I thought, oh, I think I need a kick in the butt is what I really thought.
You need to be an army of one.
No, I wanted to be with more than one for sure. But so I went back for my first semester sophomore year at Smith. And during that semester, I applied to West Point. My dad was thrilled. My mother was horrified. And around Christmas time of my sophomore year at Smith, I got some feedback that I was probably going to be admitted. And so I took second semester off and I cut my braids off and I learned how to shine shoes and I started running and all that kind of stuff. And I got Senator Kennedy nominated me, Senator Ted Kennedy, for admission. And so I started that summer of 79 and the rest is history.
Okay, so in 79, how long had women been admitted to West Point at that point?
So I was in the fourth class that had women in it.
Fourth class of women. All right, so you're still a pioneer at West Point?
I think so. I mean, I wasn't the first or second class, and they really broke the ice for sure.
There was some ice left for you, I suspect.
There was plenty of ice left, plenty, and glass. And so it was the first year that we had women in all the classes above. And I thought that the upper class women would be my mentors. Turns out, boy, and I think maybe because they had it so rough, they didn't want to be easy on us. Maybe they didn't want to help us so much. Anyway, in my company, I never really got any support from the upper class women, which surprised me. And now that I'm older, I understand it a bit. I was harsh, I think, in my opinions of some of the women who I felt couldn't meet the standards. And, being one of so few, there were 120 women in my class, in the class of 1,400. So we stood out. And I didn't want to stand out. Going from a time when I like attention, I'm a very social person, I enjoy interacting with others, to your plebe year, you can't do any of that. You are a plebe. You are a lowlife. You can't talk to anyone. You can't socialize. You're walking along walls and pinging across, from class to class. It was ridiculous. It was very, very tough. But I didn't want to stand out. I didn't want to give my classmates, upperclassmen, a reason to believe that I shouldn't be there.
Laurel, in the story, there's that final tableau where you are holding one of your soldiers in your lap while she's holding her sick and dying child in her lap. And that's a powerful image. Does that define your feeling of your time in leadership in the military? Because I got to tell you, a male officer cannot do what you did. I suppose the question I'm asking is that even more reason why we need women in leadership roles in the military to provide that kind of care.
Oh, I might disagree with you there, because shortly after that happened, shortly after the child died in her arms while I was holding her, and that's a scene I will never, ever, ever, ever forget. one of my platoon leaders came into the room, a man, and he looked at me. They had taken the child, and my soldier was out of the room. He looked at me and opened his arms, and I fell apart and I cried in his arms. I think if he had been there, he could have done that for her. I really do.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. Hey, that's a great point to thank you for writing that lovely story. Thank you for being part of the Mighty Pen, Laurel. You're a wonderful writer, a good friend to me, a good friend to the Mighty Pen, and a good writer.
Well, David, I have to give you credit too, because your course is tough and you were tough on us, all us military people. And I loved that because if for any writers out there listening, if you have people read your writing and they just say, oh, this is wonderful, this is great, this is fabulous, and they don't give you any reason to improve your writing, then that's not helpful. You were extremely helpful in your course.
Now I have to choose whether to leave that into this interview or not.
I believe you should.
I think we should. I think we will. All right. Laurel, thank you. Stay warm out there in Colorado and keep writing. Yeah. We'll see you in another Mighty Pen class.
Thank you, David. I sure will.
The Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans and their families, offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or just send us your thoughts, email us at mppodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you're a veteran or a family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America, and you want to learn how to best write and tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's pieces and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Original music for this episode provided by David L. Robbins. Lastly, if you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen podcast. It's an honor